I love this slide here because it basically spells out the function of the urinary system and what it does. All right, in a real kind of minimalist type of point of view here. But basically, how many more times can I say basically? The kidneys, all right, are a filter. That's what they do. They filter stuff. All right, and the only thing that's going to actually a fluid that's going to travel to the kidneys is the blood. If you remember, all right, blood is actually considered a connective tissue. It's the third type of connective tissue. It's a fluid connective tissue. And there's lymph fluid and blood. Okay, so the kidneys are going to filter the blood, get rid of any waste products, and it'll make urine. All right. Then the urine goes from the kidneys, all right, to the urinary bladder through, all right, the ureters, act as a transport tube. And then the urinary bladder is kind of like a storage facility, all right, for the urine until it's time to get rid of it. And it does so through the urethra, which is the elimination region. All right. So we're going to go through, and some of this stuff you already have labeled in your atlas from 210. So the first couple of things you're going to see, you'll be like, oh, that's pretty familiar to me, like this one right here. All right. So all of these structures here we will discuss in this chapter here. We're going to spend a lot of time on the kidneys, of course, in the renal physiology here. Okay. You want to make sure, all right, that you're able to tell which is the left and which is the right. All right. A nice way to remember is the inferior vena cava is always on the right side of your body. All right, the descending abdominal aorta is always right in front of the vertebrae. The vertebrae are pretty much midline. Okay, so the inferior vena cava is always to the right, so this is going to be your right kidney. Obviously, this will be the left kidney. All right, and then you can see on top of each kidney, you've got your adrenal glands or your suprarenal glands. All right, on the outside, that's what this arrow is pointing to for number 8. That is the renal capsule. All right, the capsule, again, is made up of dense irregular connective tissue. And you can see these yellow tubes leaving. That's going to represent the ureters, all right, left and right, and then our urinary bladder here. Okay, you can't see the urethra here on this model. So here you can kind of see both a gross dissection, an actual figure from the textbook here, all right? But both kidneys, and if you notice, the right kidney is higher than the left. Does anyone know why the right? Did I say right kidney? Sorry. The right kidney is lower than the left. Does anyone know why the right kidney is lower than the left? Well, you can't see it here, but the liver is supposed to be here in that position.
I was going to say liver, but I was like, no,
Yeah.
I don't think it's right.
No, the liver, again, remember from lecture, the liver is in the right upper quadrant, and it sits right below the diaphragm. And so the right lobe is the bigger lobe of the liver, all right? So it pushes the kidney down on the right side. So the left is going to be higher than the right here, all right? Then you can see on where the descending abdominal aorta bifurcates here, there's only going to be one structure that's going to sit anterior to it, and that's the ureter. So you can see here is the left ureter coming down into the urinary bladder. Here's the right ureter coming down into the urinary bladder. All right, now looking at the urinary system from the posterior, from the back, you can see that about almost 50% of the kidneys are a little bit below the 12th rib. So kidneys don't have the complete protection, all right, of the ribs. That's why and they're both retroperitoneal, which means they make contact with the posterior abdominal wall. So they're very close to the backside here. That's why certain sports, especially boxing, you're not allowed to hit somebody in this region here. They call it a kidney punch, literally, because you can damage the kidneys quite severely. They don't have as much protection as some of the other organs do here. All right, and then you can see the ureters traveling down into the urinary bladder, and then the urethra right through there. So here's another, all right, a model for diagramming here. All right, So keep in mind, again, the inferior vena cava is on the right side. So this is the left kidney here. This is going to be the right kidney over here. There's the renal capsule, that outer layer around the kidney. All right, and then you can see, all right, the red blood vessel traveling to the kidney is going to be a renal artery. So the one here that I'm pointing to, that's the right renal artery. Here's the left renal artery. And then you have your renal veins. All right, the veins are going to be in front of the arteries here. The left renal vein is actually longer than the right. And the reason why is because the inferior vena cava is more towards the right side. All right, so the left has to stretch further. Okay, here are the ureters coming out these yellow tubes here. All right, the descending abdominal aorta, inferior vena cava. All right, and then you can see that concave area of the kidney where the blood vessels and the ureters exiting out of, all right, and where you'll have nerves in that region. That's going to be the hilum, okay, where all the stuff is coming and going. All right, so far so good. We've seen this before, all right, from 210. All right, that's good. It's a nice review. All right. So when we're talking about the kidney, and literally I always think of a kidney bean, all right, so they call it a bean-shaped organ here, all right, it will have that area, we just saw it, the hilum, where all of the vessels are coming and going, nerves are coming and going, all right, the ureters are exiting out of the kidney here, all right. So the hilum is going to be on the concave side, all right, that's going to be more medial or towards, you know, the spine and the inferior vena cava and the superior and the abdominal, the descending abdominal aorta. All right. Then the convex part of the kidney, that's going to be the lateral border. All right. Then superior to each kidney, we'll have our adrenal glands. They sit on top. All right. Let's get into the inside of the kidney here. All right. So the kidney, we saw in the adrenal gland how we had a cortex and a medulla. Cortex was the outer area, the medulla was the inner region. Same thing here when we're talking about the kidney. The outer area is going to be the cortex. The inner portion is going to be the medulla. All right? So we're going to see, all right, in the medulla, all right, we're going to have these areas in which parts of the cortex kind of invaginate or penetrate down into, and we call those the renal columns. All right? And in between these areas, these renal columns, all right, in the medulla, we have these structures called the renal pyramids, and they have almost like a triangular type of shape. All right? The wider portion is going to be more towards the outer cortex area. The inner portion, or the shorter portion, I should say, is or narrower portion is going to be towards the medulla. All right. So let me show you right here. All right. So here's the cortex. All right. This lighter tannish area. Then we get in more towards the internal portion. That's the medulla right in here. Okay. So you can see that there's certain areas here where the cortex kind of moves down, all right, between these darker shaded structures. That is going to be, all right, our renal column here. Okay, you can see it a little bit here and here. All right, these darker areas, they look, this one's nicely and highlighted. It's a fan-shaped structure here. All right, that's the renal pyramid. So the base of the pyramid is going to be closer to the cortex, all right, and the apex of the pyramid, all right, is going to be facing inward towards the medulla. And at the base of these pyramids, all right, we have what's called the renal papillae here. And that's this narrower structure. All right, so that's going to be the apex of the medulla. The base is going to be along this region here. This is actually called, all right, the corticomedullary junction, where the cortex meets the medulla. So you can say that the base of the renal pyramid is right there at the corticomedullary junction. Okay.
What was 2A again?
2A, the column, renal column.
Thank you.
You got it. Okay. So what we're going to see here is, all right, we're going to start to subdivide parts of the kidney. And the first one here are the renal lobes. All right. And basically what a renal lobe is made up of, it's going to be made up of a renal pyramid and then parts of the renal columns on either side. Okay? And those are going to be the lobes. So at the base of the lobe, all right, that is going to be the base of the renal pyramid there. All right? So you'll have these spaces inside the kidneys, and this is going to be when we start to form urine, and we're going to drain urine, all right, from these structures for the eventual elimination from the kidney. All right? So these spaces inside, all right, are referred to as the renal sinus here. And it's basically just a drainage area for the urine. All right? And we have different names for these areas here. All right? And we go from small to large. Okay? So we have what's called the minor calyx, a major calyx, and a renal pelvis. Okay? So the minor calyces are found, all right, at the base, or not the base, excuse me, the apex here, all right, of our renal pyramids. So they'll drain, all right, into, all right, a minor calyx. All right. Then what will happen is a whole bunch of minor calyces will drain into a bigger structure, all right, and that is then called a major calyx. And then a bunch of the major calyces will drain into one big area of the kidney near the hilum, okay? And that's called the renal pelvis. That's an awful drawing. Holy moly. Let me just get that off there. All right, so let me show you. Okay. All right, so here you can see here are the renal pyramids that I'm putting the X's on. So here at the apex of the renal pyramid, excuse me, that is a minor calyx. So I'm drawing this arrow to. Okay. That's a minor calyx. So when we get a couple minor calyces draining into, you can see a perfect example right here. Here are two minor calyces. They're draining into here, into a major calyx. And then when you get several major calyces, like this one here and this one here, and they drain in, all right, to this big kind of swelling here, that's the renal pelvis. And all the major calyces drain into the renal pelvis, and then eventually the renal pelvis, all right, will form into the ureter, and it'll drain urine from the kidney. All right, quick review. Here's the cortex. Here's the medulla. All right, on the outside of the kidney, all right, we have the renal capsule. Again, that dense, irregular connective tissue. So here's a picture from your book here. All right, you can see here, all right, when we're talking about one of the lobes here, you can see it's made up of a renal pyramid and then parts of the renal columns that are adjacent to it, some here and here. And it's this whole area here. So this renal pyramid then drains into this minor calyx, which meets up with this adjacent minor calyx to form the major calyx. And that major calyx drains into the renal pelvis, which will then form the ureter here. Okay, so we talked about how the kidney, all right, is a filter. And so we're going to talk about the filtering mechanism now. All right, you should all be excited because you get to learn about how pee is made, okay, in case you were wondering. All right, now, believe it or not, your kidneys play a major role in your blood pressure. All right, we'll talk about that role more in the lecture portion. All right, but part of that, all right, when we talk about the influence of blood pressure and how we increase fluid volume, decrease fluid volume, all right, we're going to see part of that role here, all right, when we talk about the actual production and creation of urine, okay? So the structure, the functional unit of this filtration process is called a nephron, okay? And so the nephron has several components that we're going to break down, all right? And we're going to start off by talking about, all right, what's known as the renal corpuscle. This is one of the components of a nephron. Let's see if I can find. Here, let me show you the nephron structure here. All right. So when we talk about the nephron, all right, we're going to include all these tubes that you're seeing here, all right, and some blood vessels here that are going to enter in. All right. So first, we're going to talk about what's called the renal corpuscle. The renal corpuscle is this bulging-like structure. And then we're going to talk about all the plumbing to the renal corpuscle, all right, which is called the renal tubule, okay? And all that is part of the nephron. All right, whoops. There we go. Okay, so when we talk about the renal corpuscle, consider that bulbish structure here, all right, which is going to be located in the cortex of the kidney. All right, so there's two parts to the renal corpuscle. All right, one is called the glomerulus, and think of that as blood vessels, capillary bed, and the other one is called the glomerular capsule. And the glomerular capsule, all right, is this kind of, I want to call it a net, all right, but it's this cap that covers the glomerulus, okay? So when you think of the glomerulus, it's a bunch of capillaries, and so you have a blood vessel that leads into, all right, this big mess of capillaries, all right, and that's called the afferent arteriole, all right? And then the one that leaves this mess of capillaries is the efferent. And it's easy to remember because the E exits, okay? So the efferent arteriole is going to drain the glomerulus, okay? So the blood that goes into the glomerulus is going to be different than the blood that comes out because it's getting filtered, okay? It's getting filtered. So the blood vessel that leads in, one more time, is the afferent, and the blood vessel that is exiting is called the efferent arteriole. Okay, so that's the glomerulus. That's the blood vessels. All right, now the other structure, the tissue structure that surrounds the blood vessels for the filtration, all right, that's called the glomerular capsule, otherwise known as Bowman's capsule. All right, and it's a double layered, I know I'm going to draw this horribly. So here's your mess of capillaries, okay? Then you got your two blood vessels that go in and out. And then you've got this kind of cup that sits over it, like this. All right, and that is the capsule. This is Bowman's capsule or the glomerular capsule. So there's two layers to it. All right, the layer that's on the inside, closest to the blood vessels, that's the visceral layer, it's permeable, which makes sense. You want it to be, because that's where the filtering has to go. Okay? So if it's impermeable, that'd be stupid, because you can't filter through something that's impermeable. Okay? So this inner layer is going to be the visceral layer, and that's the permeable layer. All right, and then the outer layer out here, all right, that's the impermeable layer or the parietal layer. And then you can see there's a space here in between the two layers. All right, that capsular space, also known as Bowman's space, okay, that is going to be where we start to create the beginnings. It's not urine yet. We call it filtrate. All right, but it's the beginnings of urine. All right, but we call that filtrate. It's not really called urine until we get to the collecting duct and tubule. Good so far? Not too bad? Basic, easy stuff? All right. So, we have two other structures that we have to go over, the vascular pole and the tubular pole. All right. The vascular pole is going to be, think about it, vascular, blood vessels. That's where your afferent and efferent, all right, arterioles are going to attach onto the glomerulus. The tubular pole is right here. All right. This is where we start the renal tubule. Okay, where we start the pipes, the pipe network. Okay, for our glomerulus. So you can see here. All right, what we're doing is we're taking a chunk here out of the cortex and a little bit of the medulla here. All right, so the majority, all right, of our nephron is going to be in the cortex. All right, so the blood vessels, here's the glomerulus, okay, and you have your afferent, all right, arteriole coming in, and then our efferent leaving. Now, if you notice, the afferent arteriole is bigger than the efferent arteriole, all right? And that's by design, okay? And we'll talk about that. It helps with blood pressure modification, how we're able to filter the items in here, all right? But that's by design. So the afferent arteriole is bigger than the efferent arteriole, all right? Then you can see here we have the glomerular capsule here, okay, that double layers. And where you see the starting of our tubular network here, all right, that's the tubular pole. And then where the blood vessels enter and exit, that's our vascular pole. Okay? So we're going to talk about all what happens here in this filtration system, all right, here of the nephron. All right, so you can, if you don't have this labeled here, all right, so here is the whole structure, everything within this, not dotted, but this dashed circle here, that's the renal corpuscle. Okay? So you can see the blood vessels, that is made up, that is the glomerulus. And then this yellow and white structure that surrounds the glomerulus, that's the glomerular capsule or Bowman's capsule. The larger of the two blood vessels, that's the afferent arteriole, and that's bringing blood into the capillary bed. And you can see here the efferent arteriole that's exiting out. Okay? Good so far?
The picture on our book is backwards.
Is it which one? That one there?
Yeah, backwards.
Oh. Because you're looking at it from the other side. Here, wait, I'll show you a better one. That's because, how about this one? Is this the same one? Yeah, it's the exact same one. Let me go back. Okay. Okay, good? Not bad? Okay, so let us show you a couple things here. All right. Here you can see, all right, this structure here, all right, leaving Bowman's capsule, all right, that is going to be our tubular pole here, but what we're starting to see is the beginning of what we call the proximal convoluted tubule. Convoluted means it's got a lot of twists and turns, okay? So this is where we start the beginning portion of our filtering process. Well, the beginning portion really is here in the capillaries, but when we start to really modify the filtrate, depending on what's going on physiologically in the body there. All right, over here at this far end, okay, this is our distal convoluted tubule. All right, and you can see it comes in close approximation here, all right, to the afferent arteriole and part of the efferent arteriole. So this whole structure that you're seeing here, all right, it's called the juxtaglomerular apparatus or complex. No, trust me, I've had to. All right, and the cells that are found in these regions here, again, are juxtaglomerular cells, also known as granular cells. So this region here, and we'll talk more about the purpose of this, the macula densa cells here. that we see in the distal convoluted tubule. We'll talk more about the physiology of that when we get to wait, that's after, oh, that won't be until after we cover metabolism. It's all good. Okay. So now that we've seen, all right, the actual filtering parts, I want to talk about the piping now, all right, the renal tubule, okay? And so we talked about the glomerulus, that bulging area. Now let's talk about the pipes leading off of that, okay? So Bowman's capsule will start to begin the creation of our filtrate here, okay? And so that leads us to the next part of the nephron, which is the renal tubule. And the renal tubule has three parts to it. Proximal convoluted tubule, which is going to be obviously proximal to Bowman's capsule, all right? Then you'll have what's known as the nephron loop, where things kind of straighten out a little bit. And then you have the distal convoluted tubule, and that's the distal portion of the structure right before it gets to the collecting duct here. All right, so we're going to see, and it's important that you know this, all right, the proximal convoluted tubule, all right, starts right there at the tubule pole, and it is lined by simple cuboidal epithelium. And not only that, that simple cuboidal epithelium has microvilli there, okay? We've not talked about in any other chapter of any type of cuboidal tissue that's had microvilli on it before. All right, normally it's columnar epithelium that has the microvilli. All right, well, in this situation, our proximal convoluted tubule, all right, these simple cuboidal cells will have the microvilli here. Okay, and we're going to talk about terms like reabsorption, secretion, excretion. And you need to know the difference, and we'll talk more about that in lecture. All right, but because as your filtrate is occurring and being modified, there's going to be subtle areas throughout this whole filtering structure that something that you may have filtered out to begin with, you might reabsorb it, all right, back into your bloodstream somewhere else. All right, we'll talk about that. So keep that in mind. We're going to see, all right, some reabsorption going on throughout this whole structure here. All right, so the second part of the renal tubule is the nephron loop, and this is kind of where we have this area of twisting and turning, all right, of the renal tubule, and then all of a sudden it just straightens out, and that's the nephron loop. It takes this big kind of what we call a hairpin turn. Okay, so the nephron loop, all right, is at the very end. It starts at the very end of the proximal convoluted tubule, and then it dives down, and that's the descending limb here. All right, and then when it starts to go back up, that's the ascending limb. All right. And throughout the ascending and descending limb, all right, that tubule will be thick and thin depending on what type of epithelium is there. Obviously, the thin segments will have squamous epithelium. The thick segments will be cuboidal. Okay, more on that. And then finally, the last part of the renal tubule is the distal convoluted tubule. So you have your proximal convoluted tubule, then you got your nephron loop. Then it comes back up, then it does the same thing. It goes and gets all squiggly again. All right, that's the distal convoluted tubule. And that part is going to connect to the collecting tubule, which is where we're going to really start to see the formation of urine beginning. All right, well, this part, the distal convoluted tubule, again has simple cuboidal epithelium, but it does not have microvilli. No microvilli, different than the proximal convoluted tubule. All right, I've seen that asked on test questions before about microvilli, where it's located, which region. All right, so here you can see, here's one of our nephrons. Okay, so you can see right here, all right, here's our glomerular capsule with the glomerulus inside. All right, the white there is representing that space, all right, that we saw inside of Bowman's capsule. All right, that's where we're going to start to get our filtrate occurring. Okay, so as the filtrate is starting to form, it's going to move here, all right, into this light green tubular system and that's our proximal convoluted tubule. Do not abbreviate on the test, by the way. PCT is WRONG, okay? Don't abbreviate, please, okay? So here's your proximal convoluted tubule, okay? Does a bunch of stuff, then it straightens out, okay? It descends and then quickly takes a hairpin turn, and then ascends, all right? That is the nephron loop, also known as the loop of Don Henley, or Henley. Don Henley is the singer for the Eagles, in case you were wondering. So the loop of Henley is where things kind of straighten out. You can see, here's the thick segment, so that's going to be what type of epithelium? Cuboidal. All right, where it's thin, that's going to be squamous. Okay? So it goes through the loop of Henley, and then it goes back up, and then it starts to get squiggly again. All right, that twisted, squiggly tube, that's the distal convoluted tubule. All right, and then it's going to connect here into the collecting tubule, and then eventually this is your collecting duct right here. All right, we'll label that. Here. All right, pretty much the same thing. All right, so I just want to show you a couple. What didn't I show you? Oh, yeah, number 12. Here's the collecting duct. So all the green structures here are representing the renal tubule. Just think about it. Tubule, renal tubule is tube system. Okay. The renal corpuscle, right? The renal corpuscle is what number 10 is pointing at, the bulb here. All right, that's the renal corpuscle, here and here. All right, and then the renal tubules, all these tubes. Renal tubule includes the proximal convoluted tubule, the loop of Henley, or the nephron loop, and the distal convoluted tubule. Okay, when we get to the loop of Henley, you can see where it's going down, that is the descending limb, and where it's coming back up, that's the ascending limb. You need to know which is which. All right, the descending limb comes off of the proximal convoluted tubule. Okay? Good so far? Not too bad? Okay. And then one more. Booyah. All right, just to test yourself, this whole structure, that's your nephron right here. It's including, all right, the glomerular capsule and glomerulus, the renal corpuscle, and the renal tubule here. That's going to be your nephron. All right, we're going to talk about the vascular system here. I'm going to tell you this right now. I love this picture here. I love it. This is going to be very helpful for you if you can memorize this, because there's a lot of terms being thrown around right here. Okay, like first of all, I just like how this breaks it down here. Okay, so in case you're wondering, like, all right, Dr. Kaz, what the heck is a nephron? Okay, I got you, no problem. All right, this whole thing that you're seeing here is the nephron. So the nephron is made up of our renal corpuscle, that bulbous structure. Okay, so the renal corpuscle is made up of two things, the glomerulus, which is the capillary bed here, and then the glomerular capsule. All right, that's the renal corpuscle. And the other part of the nephron is the renal tubule, and that's this tubule system here, the tubular system, all right, that comes off of the renal corpuscle. All right, the first part, okay, the renal tubule is made up of three parts. First part is the proximal convoluted tubule. The second part is the nephron loop, or the loop of Henley. And then the last part is the distal convoluted tubule. And then just before, all right, the structure drains into that collecting duct, you have what's called the collecting tubule. Okay, there's just this little bit here, this big, huge duct. This is where we're going to start to make our urine, like literal urine, all right, pee. All right, we'll be here in the collecting duct. So as we go through here, you can see afferent arterioles bringing blood into the glomerulus. It's going to undergo filtration, and then the exiting blood is going to go and leave through the efferent arteriole. And we'll start to make our filtrate right in this space here. It'll start draining in this area. What type of epithelium is found here in the proximal convoluted tubule? Cuboidal, yes, but what kind? Well, yeah, but remember there's something special on the very end of it? It's got microvilli. Yeah, it's got microvilli. But yeah, absolutely right. That is cuboidal epithelium. All right, the only place that we're going to see our microvilli, all right, is going to be here and here. All right, but we will not see, all right, the cuboidal epithelium in the distal convoluted tubule. All right, it does not have microvilli on it. Okay, I've seen that on tests before. Okay, so then we get into the loop of Henle. Okay, or the nephron loop. All right, we've got the thick segment here. You can see that's cuboidal epithelium. Then it gets thin because that's squamous epithelium. And then as we go up into the ascending limb, we got a thin segment, and then we transition back to the thick segment, and then back here. Great, I love this picture. I just think it's very helpful if you just need a little help to kind of understand as we go. And you'll probably refer back to it, all right, because we're going to be talking about some of the different cells here, all right, when we get into the actual physiology of this, okay? All right, so I told you that the functional unit for the kidney when we're talking about filtration is the nephron. Well, there's two types, okay? And we name them for where they're primarily located. All right, the first one is called the cortical nephron, and the majority of it is going to be in the cortex, okay? Then the other type of nephron is called a juxtamedullary nephron, which means some of it is in the cortex and some of it is in the medulla. Okay? So keep that in mind. There's two types. Okay? Cortical nephron and the juxtamedullary nephron. All right, now this is kind of where we're going to get into, all right, some of the different type of blood vessels that are going to be involved here. Okay? We already saw the blood vessels that had to do with what was going on, all right, in the glomerulus, afferent arterial, efferent arterial, and the capillaries. All right, but again, a lot of what we're doing here has to do with filtration. So we want to filter out the blood and the filtrate that we're making many, many times. We want to make sure, okay? So when we talk about the structures here, all right, the cortical nephron, you can see the majority here, all right, of our nephron is up here in the cortex. And then our juxtamedullary nephron, you can see it's a little bit closer, all right, and a majority of that loop of Henle, or that nephron loop, dips deep down here into the medulla, okay? So you want to know the difference between the two. And then we got two different, all right, capillary bed structures. You've got the peritubular. Now look at the name, peritubular, which means that these capillaries, we're going to find them around the tubular portion. Now you can't really see it here because it would just be too much to look at. So imagine here, all right, the peritubular capillaries. All right, superimpose all these capillaries right here. All right, we just didn't put them on top of one another. Okay, so peritubular capillaries are going to be found on top of and throughout, all right, your proximal convoluted tubule and your distal convoluted tubule. So just pick up all these capillaries and slap them on top of this area here. That's what we're seeing. Okay, we just didn't do it on the model because it'd be hard to tell the difference. The other set of capillaries down here, the vasa recta, okay, again, pick up these capillaries and slap them right here on top of the loop of Henle. That's where you're going to find both of these capillary beds. All right, this will be all over the tubule capillary, all over the tubule structures here, the distal and proximal convoluted tubule. That's why we call them peritubular capillaries. And the vasa recta, think of it like this. All right, recta is straight. All right, so the loop of Henle, or the nephron loop, is straight. All right, so these capillaries are on the straight portions of the loop of Henle. Okay, so like it says here, capillaries in yellow right here, surround the proximal convoluted tubule, the distal convoluted tubule, and part of the loop of Henle down in here. Okay, the long straight capillaries surround the loop of the juxtamedullary nephrons, all right, connected to the capillaries in the yellow above. All right, so these will be over here, and these will be found over here. Okay. Oh, we've already labeled that. All right, and then finally, as we come to the end of our tubular system, all right, we're going to see the nephron draining into the collecting tubule. Okay, and like I said, that collecting tubule is this little short part here. All right, this little bit, okay, before it drains into this big collecting duct there. All right, so a bunch of those collecting tubules will drain into the collecting duct, and then we're going to start to see, all right, where we're going to start to make our urine here, okay? And then all these collecting ducts will drain into an even bigger structure called the papillary duct, okay? And that's located at the renal papillae. Well, what's that? Remember our renal pyramid, okay? The papillary ducts will drain down here into the renal papillae. So you have all these ducts just draining down into this thing. And then the renal papillae drains into the minor calyces. And then a bunch of minor calyces drain into what? What's the bigger one called? Major calyces. Yep. Yep. Okay. And we're going to talk about these cells, but just quickly, because they're here. Our principal cells. We talked about these two hormones, aldosterone, which is made, it's a mineral corticoid. Remember, chapter 17, aldosterone was actually made in the adrenal gland, okay, in the cortex of the adrenal gland, all right, in the zona glomerulosa, okay. And then antidiuretic hormone, also known as ADH. Does anyone remember where that's made? Kind of a trick question. It's made in the hypothalamus, but secreted by posterior pituitary, or the neurohypophysis. Okay? But they both have to do, all right, with fluid balance. Okay? Depending on your state of hydration and dehydration. Okay? So these principal cells will be, their activity will be modified, all right, by both of those hormones, okay? And we'll talk about the effects there. And then our intercalated cells, there's two types, A and B, okay? Important that we know this. It's going to help, and we'll talk about this when we get to pH and acid-base balance, all right? But it helps to regulate the acidity of your pee, of your urine, and it helps to regulate your blood pH. And we all know why that's important, okay? Because we don't want our plasma proteins breaking down, okay? Or any proteins, for that matter, really breaking down, okay? And this is a perfect place to stop, all right? We'll talk about the blood flow through the kidneys next class, okay? And is there any questions about anything? No? OBKB.